Good morning, everyone. It's me. Hey, it's Tuesday. Working from home. It's actually kind of nice outside. If you see, look at this light coming in. So I might actually go outside and go for a walk today, which might be kind of nice. I haven't been out of the house in quite some time, so I'm looking forward to that. How's everyone doing? I am going to be going through this graph for the next couple of minutes or so. It's a pretty relevant graph for the times we are living in. If you see our SRAS, bam, and our aggregate demand, and you see where they are intersecting with each other, that's going to be labeled our Y1. And then we have the LRAS, boom, here, the long run aggregate supply, and this is kind of an indicator of where we should be. You know, that's the YF, the full employment output. You know, we should be, this intersection should be on this curve. However, we are below or to the left. We call that a recessionary gap, which means that GDP is not where it should be. Unemployment is high, and generally, when we're in a recessionary gap, what politicians and even the Federal Reserve, you know, our central banking system, what they try to do is they try to look at ways in which we can achieve an equilibrium. So if you look at this graph, and if you're a politician and you're thinking, how can I, fix the economy? You know, we have three options of how we can approach, just using this graph. Option number one could be, if I'm the president or if I'm a member of the Congress, I could say, what happens if we were to simply decrease the LRAS curve? Because if we could move this curve to the left, you see, we can get a new equilibrium. However, if you remember what I just said a couple of minutes ago, the LRIS shows our potential. It shows where we should be. So there's no real reason why we would want to move this curve to the left. Our factors of production are tied to the LRIS as well: land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So a decrease in the LRIS would mean decreasing either land, labor, or capital, which is not a wise choice. So that first option is usually never one that's taken, that's really acted upon. This second option, if we're facing a recession, could be, what happens if we were to try to support our suppliers? What if we made it easier for suppliers to produce things? What if we gave them incentives? What if we made it cheaper for them? What if we took away regulations? What happens if we pass some sort of law that makes it easier for these makers and these sellers and these producers to do their job? Well, if you remember, if things get easier or cheaper, this SRAS curve is going to be shifting here. And you notice, if this were to be acted upon, we can actually have a equilibrium, a new long run equilibrium. This could actually pull us out of the recessionary gap. And if you notice, this increase to the SRAS has led to a decrease in prices P2 and an increase in GDP. So let me write that right here. It's a decrease in prices and an increase in GDP. Well, there's another option that we can take as well. I'm going to use green here. Boom. There's another option we can take. It's instead of focusing on the supply side, how about we focus on the demand side? Remember, this is all about spending, government spending, consumer spending, business spending even. What happens if we maybe lower taxes, or if the government creates a new program and the government starts hiring more people, the government starts spending more? Let's look at SRAS 1 and AD 1. And if we have an increase in AD, boom, AD 2, that also gets us back to a full employment equilibrium. It pulls us out of that recessionary gap. Okay, let me label this SRS 2 really quick. And then what has happened with this increase in AD? Well, this increase in AD, if we graph this out, price level 3, let's do that. What has happened is our price level has gone up, increase in the price level, and our GDP has gone up, increase in GDP. So these are kind of the two competing theories, right? One's called supply side economics. Let's do a little list, bam, let's do a little bit of, give a little pizzazz. Supply side economics saying if we're in a recession and we facilitate the supply of our country, we can decrease the price level, increase the GDP, and get out, pull out of this recession. Then there's the demand side economics, boom, 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 which is saying instead of facilitating our supply chains, let's empower our consumers, let's create jobs, let's spend more money, and in doing so, the price level is going to increase, the GDP will increase, and this might help us get out of this recession. Aggregate demand, this demand side economics is often referred to as Keynesian economics, and Keynes was sort of the leading economist who promoted this idea. And this is what was happening during the Great Depression. If you remember the New Deal, we have a recessionary gap, and it's the government who is spending, creating these programs in an attempt to pull us out of that recession. And this supply side economics, it's popularly referred to as Reaganomics, facilitating the business community, because if you see what happens when you increase this SRAS, the price level decreases and our GDP goes up, more or less saying that if we facilitate our supply chains, it is the consumer who will benefit. And that's kind of the leading theory behind supply side economics. And let me go to this, another quick little definition. I have these tabs open that kind of show the two different theories, supply side versus demand side. And it says there is a single big distinction. A pure Keynesian, which is demand side, right? Let's facilitate the demand to get us out of this recession. A pure Keynesian believes that consumers and their demand for goods and services are key economic drivers, while a supply sider believes that producers and their willingness to create goods and services set the pace for economic growth, which is a pretty interesting argument. If we can go more in depth, this is some key takeaways from supply side economics. It says supply side economics holds that increasing the supply of goods translates to a growth for the economy, which is exactly what I illustrated here in this drawing, where if SRAS increases to SRAS 2, what do we have? We have a decrease in the price level and an increase in GDP. So according to the model and according to the theory, it holds that increasing the supply of goods can translate to economic growth for a country. In supply-side fiscal policy, practitioners often focus on cutting taxes, lowering borrowing rates, and deregulating industries to foster that increased production. So also the SRAS curve, what can move and influence this curve? Well, it's ease of production, more or less, is simply put. If things are easier for this company to produce, then it'll increase. And if things are cheaper, production will also increase. So that's also this idea behind cutting taxes. Can't really highlight right now, but if we cut taxes for businesses or large corporations, this could actually transfer to a increase production, which could transfer to economic growth. Supply-side fiscal policy was formulated in the 1970s as an alternative to Keynesian demand-side policy. Okay, so let's take a look at what these takeaways for demand-side and Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics focuses on using active government policy to manage aggregate demand in order to address or prevent economic recessions. Keynes developed his theories in response to the Great Depression and was highly critical of the classic economic arguments that natural economic forces and incentives would be sufficient to help the economy recover. Activist fiscal and monetary policy are the primary tools recommended by Keynesian economists to manage the economy and fight unemployment. So both these theories, it could be interesting to see which one of these theories comes out in this stimulus package and maybe in this newsletter we're about to read. And also, if you're active in listening to politicians or maybe watching the news, it could be interesting to see what the news is talking about. Are they talking about our supply chains and trying to facilitate those, or are they talking about consumers and empowering the consumer, or maybe government spending, right? Demand versus supply. And it's also important to realize that both of these theories, both the supply side economics and demand side economics, they're models and they're theories, and it's easy to look at this graph and say, well, if you increase supply, price level goes down, GDP goes up. But in reality, of course, it's not that simple, because in reality there are multiple factors that are both shifting demand and supply at the same time. So this might even bring up the question, why can't we do both? Why are people split? Why is there just this debate over facilitating the supply or facilitating demand? Why can't we do both? And let me open up a new document right here, and we can look at some. Don't save. We can look at some scenarios. Oh, that line. Okay, one more time. Yeah. What might happen if we do both? Let's enter in this graph. Boom. Boom, boom, boom. And maybe this question is going to be a little hard to answer with this graph, because these lines that I'm drawing and these models that we're using are kind of arbitrary without tons and tons of data. But let's see if I can explain this. AD real GDP. Now, first of all, we don't, if we are experiencing a recession, we don't necessarily know by how much. I'm just drawing these lines as a model, but if we really wanted to transfer this over to a real life situation, is our aggregate demand curve really here, or is our aggregate demand curve maybe here, and our intersection is just a tiny bit off? Or is our aggregate demand curve way down here and we're experiencing even higher unemployment? It's hard to pinpoint exactly what this gap is, right? Using a model, we're just going to have to make assumptions and base our arguments on theory. So that's what I'm going to try to do. Price level. Here's Y1, here's YF. Now, if you remember me saying the LRAS it kind of co-aligns with our factors of production, right? We have land. Let's write these down. Land, labor, capital, and then even sometimes entrepreneurship is thrown in there. Entrepreneurship is thrown in there as well, which means that if we increase both supply and demand at the same time, we put in very active policies to stimulate both. What could happen, is a possibility, is that if our demand increases, AD2, our supply increases. PL1 Y2. What could happen is that we get out of the recession, we're pulled out of the recession, but then we end up going to the right of our LRAS, to our full potential. And what this means is that we are overutilizing our factors of production, and that's just another way of saying we are entering into an unstable economy. So, the whole idea of fiscal policy and monetary policy isn't to get above this line, or it's not to get below this line, but it's to kind of sway back and forth, trying to find this balance, trying to balance and get right on this line, which is usually why you don't see drastic measures such as supply side coupled with demand side, unless things are really, really bad. So kind of the key takeaway is if we're in a mild recession, maybe only one of these is necessary. Maybe only supply side economics is necessary. Maybe only demand side economics is necessary. If we're in a mild recession, doing both of these things could, it's potential that we enter this unsustainable territory. But we may see, like with this new stimulus package that's coming out, we may see a little bit of both of this. And again, it's really hard to quantify where in current day, where this point is. But that's kind of a key takeaway, that we don't want to, even though it looks like a good scenario, even though it looks like, wow, prices are decreasing while GDP is increasing, that seems like a dream scenario, but it could enter into something that's not sustainable, something that could potentially be dangerous, over the overheating of an economy. So looking at supply side, right? Supply of goods translates to economic growth for a country. And demand side, government policy, government spending, consumer spending. Let's take a look at this newsletter and let's see if we can find any fiscal policy that relates to the demand side of things or the supply side of things. And so here's a newsletter from Planet Money. It says, rethinking the debate over health and wealth. This is by Greg Rosalsky. And it says, we just got off the phone with Paul Roomer, the NYU economist who won a Nobel Prize in 2018 for his research on economic growth. We thought it might be a good time to talk about the future of the economy. He scared us, but he also had a good plan. He described the current national conversation over what to do about the coronavirus as a choice between health and wealth, between either shuttering the economy and saving lives or opening the economy and endangering millions. But Roomer believes that if the federal government pursues a new strategy where it coordinates industry, sets up staff testing sites, and buys virus-fighting equipment at massive scale, we can have a better option within a month or two. Boom, 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 boom. The way he sees it, the current two choices aren't nearly as good. One is continued social distancing until scientists deliver us a vaccine available for widespread use, which could take 2 years. Waiting that long, Roomer says, would mean the end to the economy and life as we know it. Jeez. The other choice is returning to normal before we get a vaccine, with everybody reintegrating into work and social life at the risk of hundreds and thousands of deaths. We're either going to keep destroying the economy or we're going to start killing people, he says. Roomer and Alan Garber, an economist physician at the provost of Harvard University, published their alternative plan last week in the New York Times. We reached out to Garber as well, but he has currently got a lot on his plate running Harvard because the university's president recently caught COVID-19. Roomer and Garber advocate that the federal government mobilize the nation like it's a war and implement measures that might allow us to re-enter a somewhat normal functioning economy without massive loss of life. As others have been advocating, they want the government to make COVID-19 tests universally available, done frequently, and used as a green light for each of us to re-enter economic and social life. The problem, Romer says, is that there are only about 100 testing machines in the United States, and we need at least 5,000 of them. And that isn't going to happen if we just sit around and pray and hope, he says. He thinks it's going to require massive government funding and centralized direction. He envisions government-sponsored testing sites throughout the country. Romer and Garber also want mass production of face masks, gloves, full body suits, hand sanitizers, ventilators, and everything it takes to make it safer for social interaction. It's a tragedy that we don't have enough masks and face shields, and God help us, we may not even have enough gloves soon for people to do their work at the hospital, Romer says. Economists usually like it when the market provides solutions, but building factories, buying machines, training workers, and doing everything else it takes to produce massive quantities of medical equipment on an aggressively short timeline will cost a lot. And, Romer says, without government intervention, companies won't do this on their own. So this whole paragraph and kind of the paragraphs before it, it seems like this is more of a demand side approach in terms of government spending. Maybe the government building factories, buying machines, training workers, doing everything it takes to produce massive quantities. Of course, government intervention. That's because corporate America naturally worries that demand for this equipment will evaporate once the crisis recedes, and that even during the crisis they may not be able to charge much for it. With historically high demand and limited supply, the market's natural response is sky-high prices. Everybody hates them, but high prices provide an incentive for manufacturers to reduce. Yet, Romer says, the reality is our political system, our emotions, will not let companies charge like 10 times as much for masks right now as we're trying to get a surge in production. So that's why the market can't do its job. We won't let the prices do what they have to do. So what this is saying, this is kind of what I was trying to say earlier. You know, it's easy to look at a graph and say, well, if our supply just increases, you know, problem solved. Or if the demand increases, you know, that's the end of it. And here he's saying, yeah, that's how it works in theory. That's what the models show. But the reality, you know, our emotions play a big part in shifting both aggregate demand and even in aggregate supply as well. You can even think about each person being a factor, you know, a variable in these models. With corporate America caught between a short demand spike and price controls, Romer and Garber want the federal government to step in and do whatever it takes to increase the production of testing machines and protective equipment. Romer compares it to what the government did after Pearl Harbor. And so this also seems like a little bit of, you know, supply side in there. You know, if we can maybe convince or provide incentives to companies to increase their production, you know, maybe this can help out. But he's frustrated by what he sees as a lack of aggressiveness in tackling the threat. Washington recently passed a $2 trillion coronavirus response package aimed at primarily helping Americans as COVID-19 and social distancing shut down our economy. And we can even say, you know, this is government spending right here. Aggregate demand. The bill includes about $180 billion for health-related efforts, including $16 billion for more medical equipment. It's not enough, Romer says. He wants the government to spend about $100 billion on medical equipment and allocate additional funds for testing sites and staff. I mean, the investments we're advocating here, they're not inconceivable, Romer says. This isn't like John Kennedy saying we're going to the moon. So something that caught my attention was maybe this line. What the government did after Pearl Harbor. I wonder if we can find a little bit more about that. Because during the Great Depression, you know, the government is trying to use these Keynesian economics to get us back to full employment, you know, to get us back to that long run equilibrium. But it's not until World War II that we actually reach full employment. So I wonder if we can do a little quick little government after Pearl Harbor. Government, should I say intervention? Economic intervention. Let's see if we can look at some. Go to good old Quora, good old homework help. Let's type this in. Let's type World War II and the American economy. See if we can find something. Let's go for some homework help first. This is a quote from World War II and the American Home Front, a National Historic Landmark themed study prepared by this dude. American industry provided almost 2/3 of all of Allied equipment production during the war. That's a lot of aircraft, that's a lot of artillery, that's a lot of tanks. 2 million army trunks in 4 years. Okay, so I guess what that newsletter was saying was that if we put our focus on production, then we can maybe see some positive change. In 4 years, American industrial production, already the world's largest, doubled in size. The output of machine tools to make weapons trebled in 3 years. Trebled. The balance between the United States and her enemies changed almost overnight. Don Burke, former PhD, says the Depression was mainly an unemployment problem. On December 8th, 1941, that problem vanished. There was a huge rush to join the military, to the point that there were no police in our village. What? Women had always been employed in the Midwest in good times, but suddenly they were in great demand to fill positions in industry. Even kids obtained work permits to fill home front jobs. Men in their 40s were working 60 hours a week, especially doing heavy work that women couldn't handle. But the economy grew with the government contracts. Okay, I get what he's saying about that Pearl Harbor reference. He's saying that, and after Pearl Harbor, we have this huge boom in industry and military jobs and military production. And he's saying maybe we can translate that over to the medical center, the medical industry. What if we had this huge boom of jobs in the medical field? All right, graphs. Confusing. Yes. I see you. Boom. So this is, let's look at these graphs one more time. This is from that assessment, The Fed Fights the Virus. And this is number 2 on that worksheet. It says the goal of lowering interest rates is to get people spending. So let's draw a little graph first. I'm gonna hit open up your paint. Bam. Don't save. Bam. Bam. Graph. Price level. And this is like the real GDP. That's a D. Okay, this question says draw an AS graph showing an economy in a recessionary gap when Y1 is less than YF. Oh gosh. Wait 1 second. I did something. Okay. So Y1 boop. Boop. AD. Y1 is going to be where the short run aggregate supply and the aggregate demand intersect. Boom. Price level. Y1. Let me open up that question one more time. Boom. When Y1 is less than YF. In YF, this is a synonym for full employment. It's also a synonym for the long run aggregate supply. So YF means it is... Wait, I totally forgot what I just read. y1 is less than yf. So y1 needs to be less than yf. Yf. If you remember that this x-axis is kind of like a number line, because we're talking about real GDP, and GDP is measured in dollars. So YF, that's full employment output, which means that is, man, I can't draw straight. It means that there's our LRIS. So that problem says the goal of what's it called? Interest rates is to get people spending. So if we start here, if this graph is our starting point, how might lowering interest rates affect this graph? So interest rates, it says it's going to get people to spend, and you remember that's going to have to do with our aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is all about spending. It's about government spending, household spending, business spending, even other countries buying American goods. So if people start spending more, the idea is that aggregate demand will increase. And so we started here in this recessionary gap, but the intention is that if we can increase our demand with spending, if we can increase our demand, here's our new point. PL2, and you see how we're perfectly lined up with this LRAS? The LRAS shows us our potential, and it shows us we're fully utilizing all of our resources. It shows full employment, and it shows a more or less healthy economy. So the intention of cutting interest rates, if interest rates decrease, that's going to lead to a increase in aggregate demand, and then hopefully the intention is to get back to that long run equilibrium. And you see how before we had that gap, we had y1 over here, we had yf over here, but now with that increase in aggregate demand, there is no gap, right? We're exactly lined up on that LRAS, and that's what we want to do. That's where we want to be. So that's illustrate how lowering the interest rate might affect the graph. Label new equilibrium. Boom. And so will lowering the interest rate affect SRS or AD? It's going to affect AD. It's that demand. So this is kind of what the graph is going to look like for number 2, right? We started with a recession and we ended in full employment. If we look at number 3 really quick, if we look at this other graph, it says draw and label a graph experiencing an inflationary gap when y1 is greater than yf. Bam, bam. y1 is greater than yf. We know yf to be the LRAS, so we draw that line. We know y1 is going to be SRAS plus AD. So let's try to make them. And we have a gap. And usually whenever we have a gap, we want to close this gap. So we want this to be over here. We either want two things. We want aggregate demand to decrease, because if aggregate demand decreases, Boom, we're back on the line. We're good. Or we want short run aggregate supply to decrease, because if that decreases, if that decreases way over there, whoa, boom, we could be good. So we want one of these things to change. We want one of these things to move to the left so we can get back in this long run full employment output. But let's look at this. It says, what might happen if Congress lowers taxes while increasing their spending? So increasing their spending, these are the big words right there. An increase in spending is going to change aggregate demand. And an increase in spending is going to increase aggregate demand. Boom, boom, boom. Y2. So our goal with all these graphs is to get back to that long run full employment. We want to be on YF. This is our home. It's safe. There's our home. There's me. Well, I should be in the home, I guess. Hold on. There's me in the home. However, what has happened? We're actually further away from our home. We're cold and scared. So this is me, and then the home's way over there in the back. Not good. So it says, could this be considered a wise decision? Why or why not? And I don't think, I would much rather be in a house than far away, alone and scared. So that's my answer. But with both of these graphs, both with, new. Bam. Let's draw these really quick. Bam, 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 bam. Oh God, no, not that. So here's the recession on the left. Here's the inflationary gap on the right. What we want to do is make our graph, this is what Congress and politicians, oh gosh, okay, one more time. I think, there we go. We want this long run employment. Let me put a green check mark there. We want this long run full employment equilibrium, right? This inflationary graph on the left, this is unsustainable. And this graph, this recessionary graph, this is inefficient. 2 F's, 1 F's, 1 F. Is it 1 F? 2 F's. I went with 2. Inefficient. No, I'm gonna go with 1. And 2. Is it 2? 2. I'm going back to 2. It's inefficient because if you remember, with the whole point of economics is utilizing our scarce resources, and we don't want our resources to be unsustainable, and we don't want to be inefficient with our use of resources. So that's why we are trying to reach this long run equilibrium. Do a little smile. Do a little. What's up? There you go. Sweet. If you have any questions or want me to go over that one more time, I can. I'm here all day. Let's see, let's go back. Let's look over these questions. Oops. No. Okay. And then these other two questions, you just gotta listen to that podcast. So there are only 2 graphs you gotta do this time. That's chess. What I wanted to let's go to what else was on my the money multiplier was on my thing to talk about, which we can't talk about. Yeah, let's do this. Don't say. I kind of want to save this. Let's save this picture. Okay. So there's this. There's a question where if we're in a recession, dang, I should have just left that open. If we're in a recession, and here's our aggregate demand. RAS. According to the Keynesian and the demand side economics, we want to increase this demand to get back to this full unemployment. AD2. And so we ran into this situation. This was after 9/11. And this was in New York City where the graph looks a little bit like this. It's a time of worry and uncertainty. You remember how emotions can actually play an effect in all this stuff? So there was this mayor. His name was Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York at the time of 9/11. And both Rudy Giuliani and George W. Bush, they see the city of New York struggling like this. And they tell the New York citizens, if you want to help out, if you want to bring the city back, and if we want to make it through this time, this recessionary gap, this time of uncertainty, time of fear, the easiest way to help out is to spend your money, to go out and shop and buy from New York local business. And so there's a great segment on Conan O'Brien where this is like October, September, maybe November, where he goes out and he just records himself in New York City, and he is spending. And there's this kind of there's this question of how does me spending my money help a city? And that's what I'm gonna try to answer right now, because there's this theory called the money multiplier. And this theory will hopefully explain how something as simple as spending $100 on a local business could help the city. And you might have seen some of this maybe going around now, maybe seeing posts seeing Instagram posts or maybe seeing news articles about buying local, maybe signs about buying local, supporting local business in this time or whatnot. And it's based on the money multiplier effect. So say, for instance, I'm gonna draw you. Here we go. This is you. You got a awfully small forehead. But let's say you. Okay, just do a little chin. Let's do a little. This is like a baggy sweater, by the way. Got a little collar. Got a little. You only got one ear. Okay, so let's say you are spending your money. Doop. Let's use a different brush for this. Let's do let's do this guy. No. Marker. Yes. Boom. That's an arrow. You are spending $100. But you are spending this money on a local business, right? This is it's the shop everyone knows. It's called Dave's. He has that big sign, Dave's. You got that big sign out in the front. He's got the door. You got the windows. It's only like 3 parking spots. Classic Dave's. You spend your $100 on Dave's, and the store manager, his name's Mark, right? He has 2 employees. He has employee number 1, and he has employee number 2. This guy's name is like Marv, and this girl's name is, it's a good name, I'm gonna be here forever. Susie, but her nickname is they call her Suze. So I got Marv and Suze. So you buy local, boom, and this $100 you spent at Dave's is actually going to be used to pay Marv and Sue's salary. So once Mark, the manager of Dave, gets this $100, he gives it to Marv. He gives it to Suze. Alright, so they each got $50. Boom. So this part's kind of straightforward. Right, your $100 is actually going to support both Marv and Suze. If they have a family, in a way, you are supporting Marv and Suze's family. Now, this is where kind of the economics jargon comes in. Every single person has a marginal propensity to save and a marginal propensity to consume. This is marginal propensity, just means your natural tendency, right? Everyone's gonna, if you're handed $100, you are going to save some and you are going to spend some. Marginal propensity to save, marginal propensity to consume. Now for Marv, with his $50 he got for the day, he is going to save $20. And he is going to consume. He's going to use that other $30 to spend. And Suze is a little bit more money minded. She is going to save 40 of those dollars, and she's going to spend 10. So now let's say Marv with this money, he is now going to go spend it locally as well. He's going to, where's he going? Where's he going? He's going to the tree shop. Tree shop. He's going to buy himself a tree shop. Boop. Boop. Big door. Could get the trees in and out. Big door. Small windows. I guess parking to the side. Parking. Because you can't block the thing. And of course there's trees out back. And then Susie, she's going to... where's she going? Where's she going? What's a good, like, local place? There's tree shop. Okay, I got it. Where's my thing? Little plant shop. Yeah, they're both very into green foliage. It's their hobbies. They're dating. Marvin Sue's. Plant shop. What does this plant shop look like? We got a little. It's small, right? It's tiny door. You have to duck to get in. Okay. Yeah. No parking. You gotta walk. You gotta walk there. Walking only. There's a trail. Okay. So now this tree shop has a couple workers too, right? They have one worker. They have two workers. In this plant shop, they only got one worker. So this $30 goes into the tree shop, boom. And then it comes out of the tree shop and into the pockets of these workers. And from these $30, worker 1 gets 10 of them. And worker 2 gets the other 20, right? And those get added to their salaries. In the plant shop, this $10 that Sue's spent at the plant shop, that $10 is going to help fund the salary of this one worker. And then I think you can see where this is going. Then both of these two workers, they go to their own local business, their own shops, right? And they spend their own money on a shop over here. He spends his own money on a shop over here. And this worker goes to this shop over here. And that shop has those workers. Each worker goes, you get the picture. It's called the multiplier, where essentially your money, oh wait, I realized you can't even see this plant shop. What is this all? Boom. What happens is that your money essentially is being reused. Or in economics would say it's being multiplied. You're $100. Yeah, you just went to Dave's to buy whatever, but in this weird everything is connected sense, that money is also funding the tree shop and the plant shop. And that plant shop worker who now has a little bit of your money is spending it on another local business. And you can see how your money is being used more than once in the same location. And which is why, if everyone if there's a time of struggle, or if there's the time of uncertainty where buying local, if everyone accepts and buys into that idea, where you could have economic revitalization, as they say, because of this money multiplier effect. And this is also interesting to think about, because if you look at this, graph, should I call it a graph? If you look at this art piece, you are essentially supporting the plant shop. Here's you, just in case you forgot. You. Even though you hate plants, you are supporting the plant shop. And it's a pretty interesting concept, and it would be interesting to see if there are current ways to maybe track. Can you track money? You can track your money. I'm sure of it, right? Every money has like a little do thing on it. That would be an interesting little project, a little thing to do, to see how, if you spend your money locally on one shop, how many different businesses is your money passing through, and what are you maybe supporting, either knowingly or unknowingly. I'm just gonna save this drawing too. Well, that's about an hour. Hour of rambling. I think my tea's a little cold now. If you have any questions, I'll just sit here and drink this tea. That was fun. I didn't get to watch that video. Maybe I can. I wanted to watch a video. Okay, let's do this. Let me find this really quick. Maybe not. Okay, let's find it. We'll find it. It's a video of the current Federal Reserve chair. This is it. Pause. Uh-oh. Pause.
Congress is not.
God, that's loud. Yeah, let's watch it. Okay, it's only 12 minutes. What if I just stay on here all day? For hours. Okay. Let's pull this over. The Fed chair, right? Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of America. His name's Jerome Powell. He was appointed. I don't know if appointed's the right word. Appointed by President Trump, but of course the Senate has to confirm him. And even though President Trump appointed him, there's been some tension between the two, as you can say. So let's see what this man has to say. It says the Senate passes $2 trillion rescue package. What was that? That's a couple days ago, right? And let's see what he has to say. Bam.
Stepping up to try and rescue this economy, the Federal Reserve, the nation's central bank, is taking emergency measures to help businesses and Americans alike, cutting interest rates, buying up hundreds of billions of dollars of debt, and offering trillions in loans to banks. And joining us now in a rare and exclusive live interview is Jerome Powell, who is chairman of the Federal Reserve. Mr. Chairman, good morning to you. It's good to have you with us.
Good morning. Thank you, Savannah.
Well, the Federal Reserve doesn't exactly print money, but as one writer put it, you do have the ability to conjure money out of thin air. My question to you is simple. Is there any limit to the amount of money the Fed is willing to put into this economy to keep it afloat? Is it a blank check?
Savannah, we, in certain circumstances like the present, we do have the ability to essentially use our emergency lending authorities. And the only limit on that will be how much backstop we get from the Treasury Department. We're required to get full security for our loans so that we don't lose money. And so the Treasury puts up money as we estimate what the losses might be. But essentially, the answer to your question, though, is no. We can continue to make loans, and really the point of all that is to support the flow of credit in the economy to households and businesses.
But, so you're saying, no, it's not a blank check, but yes, you're prepared to spend an unprecedented amount.
We certainly are. It's not a blank check in the sense that we are limited by the ability to take losses, but I would say that the number, effectively $1 of loss absorption of backstop from Treasury is enough to support $10 worth of loans. So really the answer is what's happened is all over the world investors have pulled back to very less risky things. That's understandable. But what that's meant is that many places in the capital markets which support borrowing by households and businesses, I'm talking about mortgages and car loans and things like that, have just stopped working. So we can step in and replace that lending under our emergency lending powers, and we will do that. We will look wherever there is in the capital markets where credit is not flowing, we have the ability in this unique circumstance to temporarily step in and provide those loans. And we will keep doing that aggressively and forthrightly as we have been.
The president has said he would like to see the country raring to go by Easter. He wants the country back open. Public health experts have resisted that timeline. Can the economy handle a months-long shutdown if that is what the public health emergency requires and demands?
Well, this is a unique situation, so I think people need to understand, this is not a typical downturn. What's happening here is people are being asked to close their businesses, to stay home from work, and to not engage in certain kinds of economic activity. And so they're pulling back. And at a certain point, we will get the spread of the virus under control, and at that time, confidence will return, businesses will open again, people will come back to work. So you may well see significant rises in unemployment, significant declines in economic activity, but there can also be a good rebound on the other side of that, and that's actually one of the main things we're trying to do by assuring the flow of credit in the economy and keeping rates low, is to assure that that rebound, when it does come, is as vigorous as possible.
I guess the issue, though, that's been sort of raised in these recent days is the cure worse than the disease? Is shutting down the economy for the sake of public health doing lasting damage to the economy that may not be recoverable? So I guess you're not a doctor, you're an economist, but where do you come down on that debate? Is it better to solve the public health crisis and then let the economy bounce back? Or do you think we should rush into opening the economy back up because, frankly, the damage being done is worse?
So that of course, is not, we're not experts in pandemics over here. We don't get to make that decision. I would say, though, that we would tend to listen to the experts. Dr. Fauci said something like, the virus is going to set the timetable, and that sounds right to me. I think the sooner we get the spread of the virus under control, people will regain confidence. When they become confident that is the case, then they will very willingly open their businesses up, go back to work, the consumer will be spending. So I think the first order of business will be to get the spread of the virus under control and then resume economic activity.
As you well know, a recession is a technical term. It means 2 straight quarters of negative growth. We've already had 1 quarter. Put it bluntly, do you think we are already in recession? Do you think it is inevitable that we will be in recession?
We may well be in a recession, but again, I would point to the difference between this and a normal recession. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with our economy. Quite the contrary. The economy performed very well right through February. We've got 50-year low in unemployment for the last couple of years. So we start in a very strong position. This isn't something that's wrong with the economy. This is a situation where people are being asked to step back from economic activity, close their businesses, stay home from work. So in principle, if we get the virus spread under control fairly quickly, then economic activity can resume, and we want to make that rebound as vigorous as possible.
Yeah, a lot of people say that after a recession like this, you could see a big bounce back. We didn't see that in 2008. It wasn't like the average recession where you see a drop and then you see a big bounce back. It was a slow and sluggish, uncertain recovery after 2008. But I think I hear you saying that once this public health issue is resolved, you expect a robust bounce back.
What I'm really saying is we don't know, and the sooner we get through this period and get the virus under control, the sooner the recovery can come. There's no other, we don't have comparable experiences to go back and look at. We know that economic activity will decline probably substantially in the second quarter, but I think many expect, and I would expect economic activity to resume and move back up in the second half of the year. Very hard to say precisely when that will be, and it will really depend on the spread of the virus. The virus is going to dictate the timetable here.
When we see some of the actions that the Federal Reserve has been taking, and they're extraordinary and in some cases unprecedented, I think some people will feel really kind of relieved and heartened, and others might feel a little worried. What are the risks associated with taking some of these bold actions, pumping so much money into the economy? I mean, one issue, of course, would be worrying about inflation. Or is there a long-term risk to the actions being taken now?
You know, we don't really see that. What we see, though, is small, medium, and large businesses are not able to borrow through their normal channels to some extent. And so we step in and replace that. That's a very healthy thing. That's a positive thing. We're providing relief. We're providing stability to get us. We're trying to create a bridge from our very strong economy to another place of economic strength. And that's what our lending really does. It's very broad. It's across small, medium, and large businesses. We're already helping state and local governments, and just places where credit is not being offered where it should be offered, where it's really just a question of liquidity and credit availability. We can step in and make that happen, and that's a very positive thing and an appropriate thing to do in this highly unusual situation we're in.
The other issue that comes up is whether or not you might run out of ammo, run out of bullets, and to that point, are you sorry that you didn't raise interest rates a little more when the economy was strong so you'd have more cushion now?
When it comes to this lending, we're not going to run out of ammunition. That doesn't happen. You know, we set the interest rates in time at what we think is the right, giving the economy the right level of support. If we'd raised interest rates more, it would have been higher than we thought, and economic growth would have been a little bit slower, so it wouldn't have mattered in the end. So we really are always setting our interest rates at the level we think is appropriate. And we've cut them to zero now. We still have policy room in other dimensions to support the economy. But the main thing we're doing now is really with our lending programs. That's the principal thing we're doing now to support the economy is through that channel.
And if I'm sitting at home right now and I lost my job, or I'm a restaurant owner and I laid off every single one of my workers, or I own a nail salon and I had to close up shop, does anything the Federal Reserve doing right now help me?
Yes, well, so keeping rates low will reduce the interest burden on people. Keeping the flow of credit will help people. Principally, though, I would look to the legislation that passed last night or this morning, really, which is going to direct aid to small, medium, and large businesses, to low and moderate income communities, to the unemployed, to state and local governments, to the healthcare system. That's really where the immediate relief is going to come from. The help from the Fed will be when the economy begins to rebound, then we'll be there to make sure that rebound is as strong as possible.
Mr. Chairman, I have to ask you, I'm sure you're aware the President has been quite critical of the Fed and of you personally. I'm not going to get into all of it, but he has in tweets called you clueless, called the Fed pathetic, slow-moving. Does what the President says affect you and what you do? Does it make your job harder, or do you just ignore it?
You know, my colleagues and I here are totally focused on our mission of serving the American people. We know that what we do is important for all Americans, and we try to do our absolute best to serve them in a way that is completely non-political, non-partisan, just to serve all Americans. That's our only focus. We don't let anything else get into our thinking, and I think, you know, that's just the way it always is at the Fed, that we have a very strong culture that's deep in our DNA, and that just is the way it's always going to be.
And finally, sir, in about 10 seconds I have left, you know, we went back and looked. This show's been on the air 60-plus years. I think it's been 30 years since we had a Federal Reserve chairman on live, maybe longer, maybe never. It's so rare to have an interview like this. I just was curious why you decided to speak out, and what is the message you want to send to Americans at this very difficult time?
Really the message is this, that this is a unique situation. It's not like a typical downturn. We've asked people to step back from economic activity, really to make an investment in our public health. They're doing that for the public good. And this bill that's just passed is going to try to provide relief and stability to those people. The Federal Reserve is working hard to support you now, and our policies will be very important when the recovery does come to make that recovery as strong as possible.
All right. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, sir, I know these are busy times. I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.